Welcome to our Just Leadership Facebook Live with Just Us. I am Ronald Simpson-Bey, the Executive Vice President for Just Leadership USA, which is the only national criminal justice reform organization that was founded and operated by people directly impacted by the criminal legal system. Just Leadership was founded on the principle that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from the resources and power to effectuate impact and change in their communities. Our mission is to amplify the power of directly impacted people by educating, elevating, and empowering their voices so they have the tools and resources to self organize and advocate for themselves, their families, and their communities. Because together, we will build a fair, just, and equitable America. 2 years ago, as part of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic in jails and prisons, we launched the Just Us campaign to call for comprehensive emergency management plans to protect the lives of people in jails and prisons during any declared national disaster. Today, with COVID cases continuing to rise and the growing threat of wildfires, hurricanes, and extreme heat, we are now facing a perfect storm of conditions that threaten the lives of those who live behind the bars. And today we'll have a powerful conversation about those conditions behind the bars. And I am joined today for our conversation by Maggie Luna, who is a Hogg Foundation Peer Policy Fellow at the Texas Center for Justice and Equity. Welcome, Maggie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yep. Mark Rice, who is the Wisconsin Transformational Justice Campaign Coordinator at Wisdom. Hello, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Thank
And
you,
last
Ronald.
but not least, Texas State Representative Philip Cortez. Thanks for joining us, State Rep. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule, and thanks for your contributions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I will ask each of our esteemed guests to introduce themselves, if you would. Take a minute to introduce yourself to our audience. Mark, you want to go first?
Sure. Currently serve as the Wisconsin Transformational Justice Campaign Coordinator at Wisdom. This campaign aims to decarcerate Wisconsin, advance racial justice, and restore the rights of people with conviction records. And the Just Us campaign is personal to me because I've been directly impacted by the system. The state of Wisconsin forced me to spend 2 years in the state prison system and almost a decade under the supervision of the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. During that time, I witnessed the deep racial injustice within Wisconsin's system. I met many Black, brown, and Native men who were convicted of less serious crimes than my crime, but they were serving much longer sentences than I was for me, and really motivated me to get into the work that I'm doing today. I'm the founder of the Close MSDF campaign. That campaign aimed to depopulate and close Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility in Milwaukee. We also aim to redirect resources to build communities. That campaign produced the largest amount of decarceration in any adult prison in Wisconsin in over 20 years. Formerly served as lead national organizer with Just Leadership USA as well, and was a 2017 Leading with Conviction fellow.
Thank you for all your hard work and contribution, Mark. Maggie?
Yes, thank you, Ronald. My name is Maggie. I work for the Texas Center for Justice and Equity. I am the Hogg Foundation Peer Policy Fellow, and I am also a lead organizer for the Statewide Leadership Council. And what we do is empower formerly incarcerated people to use their voices and their experience to make meaningful change at the legislature and use our experiences in our our pain that we went through to help others and move forward. And so the Statewide Leadership Council is a group of advocates who have all been directly impacted by the system. And we are working to grow and build across Texas. I'm also a Leading with Conviction 2022 fellow. So I'm very proud to be here. Thank you.
We're proud to have you. Thank you so much, Maggie, for your contribution. State Rep Cortez, what about yourself? Introduce yourself to our audience, please.
Well, thank you again for having me today. My name is Philip Cortez from the Texas House of Representatives. I represent House District 117. I've been serving now. I'm going for my fifth term this November to continue serving the residents of District 117. I'm born and raised here in San Antonio. I've had a career in public service going back to my days on the San Antonio City Council in 2007. In addition, I also am a 20-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force, retired, and also teach at the University of Incarnate Word in their graduate and undergraduate programs. And I've been doing that now for about 3 years. Like I said, I was born and raised here in San Antonio, went to UTSA for my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, and I went to UT Austin for my PhD in educational administration and leadership. So that's just a little bit about my background, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Absolutely. Thank you for your service to our country and for your public service to your state. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Let's get into this conversation here. This first question is for Maggie and Mark. Mark and Maggie, can you please speak about how your experience as directly impacted people or leaders has impacted your work around the Just Us campaign?
Sure, I'll go. My experience, I was incarcerated during Hurricane Harvey at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And it was terrifying for me. All the lights went out, the power went out, there was no way in or out. We had guards that were stuck there for days. The water went out, and we're all in one dorm. And so it started to smell like toxic sewage. And we were stuck in there. We couldn't get out. The guards didn't even want to come in to do count because it was so bad. And so, anyway, it was terrifying for me. I didn't have any communication with the outside world. I didn't know what was going on. And I honestly thought I was going to die. And I remember my bunkie telling me whenever, because we had, the lights were out, but we had a backup generator that was running our fans. And so as soon as the fans went out, my bunkie looked at me and was like, Luna, are we going to die here? And I was just like, and my thought was, stop talking because you're breathing hot air. And I didn't want to suffocate. And so, and it was just a moment when I kept thinking, we're humans, like, do they know out there that we are in here, And so that was terrifying for me. And then when I got out and started working on policy, COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, people were suffering. They were already eligible for parole. They were just sitting in there, and there was no plan for them to move. And then we had the Texas freeze. And people were dying, and there was no plan. They had a plan for the pigs. They had a plan for the farm equipment, for the officers. But for us, it was just like we were, if they had to leave us to die, they would. And so it was terrifying. And there are people who suffered tremendously during the freeze. So it's very important to me that we get a plan implemented in Texas, because I've been there and I haven't seen as bad as some people have, and hopefully nobody else has to.
Wow. How long did you have to endure those conditions when you and your bunkie were and stuck in that cell during the power outage?
I want to say it was 7 days.
Wow.
But I can't, I don't really remember, but I know that from start to finish, I know we went 2 weeks without visits because our roads were flooded. They said the entryway had just washed away. And we had guards that were sleeping in the picket, which is the guard shack.
Okay.
And so nobody knew what was going on. But yeah, it was like the first couple of days we had generator, then it went off. And then we were just stuck in this stale, rancid, toxic air for days.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. What about you, Mark? How have your experience as a directly impacted leader impacted your work around the Just Us campaign?
Sure. One of the key experiences for me was being detained in Milwaukee State Detention Facility for 6 months for allegedly violating a rule of supervision that did not involve any new crime or new conviction. It's a state prison, Milwaukee State Detention Facility. It's a state prison in downtown Milwaukee, a high-rise prison. It's a building within inside of a building. And in the summer, it gets extremely hot in that building. There's no air conditioning. The ventilation is very poor. There's no access to fresh air, no access to sunlight. We can never see outside. We can never go outside. People are often locked down over 20 hours a day. When I was there, it was very overcrowded. So I was forced to sleep on the floor for several days. I was just trapped in this one cell that's designed for one person, but there were 3 people packed in that cell. So you have one bunk bed, and then they roll out this little mat called a boat, and the one person sleeping on the floor on this boat. And we're stuck there almost all day. And during the summertime, it can feel like well over 100 degrees due to the really poor ventilation in that place. And so it's a very inhumane environment. And for me, and the whole prison, it was just unbelievable to me to think that it was all for people who had allegedly been accused of technical violations, hadn't even been convicted of new crimes, who were under supervision. And later on, I got involved in organizing, got involved with several organizations, Expo, Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing, Wisdom, MICA, many organizations. But at the time, I really didn't know, well, there was so much organizing work around mass incarceration in Wisconsin. But one of the key experiences, again, was in 2015, James Wilborn died due to heat exhaustion in Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility. James was a member of an organization called Table of the Saints, a directly impacted led organization in Milwaukee. And he had some serious health conditions. He wasn't able to get access to medications that he needed. Again, it got very hot, and James died due to heat exhaustion. And James was an exemplary leader in the community. He worked closely with a lot of the organizations that I was working with at the time. He was also the prayer warrior of Table of the Saints. He was known for calling guys up 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. He'd ask you one thing: can I pray for you? He'd get on. That's the kind of guy he was. And so that really lit a fire within a lot of the organizations that I was with. And we decided to launch that campaign that aimed to close down Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility and depopulate Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility. And people at first thought it was a joke. They thought it was going to be impossible, but used a lot of the tools that I learned in Leading with Conviction, other training programs, and did one-on-ones with many other directly impacted leaders and organizers in Milwaukee, and was a directly impacted led campaign. And we were able to achieve results that people previously thought were impossible. We created, the population was cut by more than half. We've seen some real community investment, reinvestment, some decarceration investment in communities and the neighborhoods that have been most harmed by Milwaukee by incarceration.
Okay.
So I think that the extreme heat is definitely one of the things that's of concern to folks in Milwaukee, with no air conditioning and these just inhumane conditions where people are literally dying. So the Just Us campaign, to me, this is literally a matter of life and death. And so we're really working to prevent harm and make sure that these emergency management programs are in place so that nobody will have to go through what James did and so many of us other impacted people in Milwaukee have gone through while we were incarcerated in these really inhumane conditions.
I mean, speaking of the inhumane condition, briefly, could you tell us real briefly, what was the mental, emotional, psychological toll that those conditions would take on you personally that you went through?
Yeah, it was a very traumatic and stressful situation because one thing, I was just facing so much time reincarceration, over 12 years of reincarceration. That was stressful, but just the conditions really took a toll as well. I mean, I saw one guy in there attempted to commit suicide. A couple of guys severely mutilated themselves. I was staying in a unit called the Special Needs Unit. Mm-hmm. There were guys coming in who had been shot in wheelchairs who were obviously victims of crimes themselves. One guy had been stabbed in the chest and almost died. So we're seeing all types of very traumatic things like that as well. And just being locked in, just being trapped in that place where you can't ever see outside, go outside. It's so hot that especially if you have some sort of pre-existing condition, asthma, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, anything of that nature. And even one of my colleagues, they denied him a CPAP machine when he was there. He needs that in order to be able to breathe properly. He could die without it. On 3 separate occasions, they denied him a CPAP machine. So we're seeing really things like that where the people during these emergency situations, incarcerated people, are just often neglected and subjected to cruel and unusual punishment, and really needs to stop. And it's just inhumane to effectively impose solitary confinement like conditions as well. We know solitary confinement is torture,
Right.
and being locked down for over 20 hours a day is almost similar in some ways to that, except you're even trapped in a cell that's overcrowded as well, which makes it even worse in some ways.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Representative Cortez, just pivot to you. I'm curious. I mean, as a representative, I want to commend you for having the courage and the social conscience to even let Justice campaign be on your radar. So I'm curious to what about Justice campaign sparked your interest in adopting this into legislation?
Well, I actually, in my current House district that I represent, I have a state prison, Dominguez State Prison here in my district. And there were many concerns when the COVID outbreak, when it hit in 2020. I was receiving numerous calls from family members of the inmates there at Dominguez, and there was concerns about the procedures that were in place. There were concerns about the lack of communication from their loved ones, and there was concern about just overall the policies that that Dominguez had in place to address the COVID outbreak that was happening there. And unfortunately, there was not a plan in place. There was not anything. This was the first time, I guess, that they had to deal with this type of situation with the pandemic. And so the lack of plan and preparation for that cost lives, and it cost many family members the ability to talk and see their loved ones while they were battling this outbreak there in state prison down the street in my district. And so that unfortunate situation during the beginning of the COVID pandemic led me to realize that there was a lack of attention and a lack of effort to ensure that the individuals there at Dominguez were safe and protected during this pandemic. And so that's really what led me to realize that there was a lack of planning and preparation there for the inmates.
Wow, that's powerful, and I thank you for taking that position. I'm just curious, that's just every politician is faced with the same reality you just spoke about, but yet you had the courage or the social conscience to actually step up and take a position on it, the position that you took. So I'm just curious, what made you take that position?
Well, I represent every person in my district, and the inmates are people too, and they deserve access to health care. They deserve to have a plan in place to stop a pandemic from spreading rapidly throughout, their facility. They are not any less of a human being than any other resident that I represent in the Texas House of Representatives. And so, although some might feel that that this is a prison and they just have to deal with whatever's there, I believe that they deserve the same rights that we would have, and the same healthcare afforded to them there in the prison facility. And so it was just that I don't see them as any less of a citizen or any less of a constituent just because they're in Dominguez prison.
Well, thank you for putting the humanity back into being human.
Yes, sir.
Maggie, I'd like to ask you this next question. As we see COVID restrictions loosen up and we turn to somewhat normal phase of life, people in prisons and jails continue to be at risk from COVID-19 and are forced into lockdown and solitary confinement. You heard Mark talk about the solitary confinement conditions in MSDF. So at the same time, we are seeing dangerous heat waves across the country and are rapidly approaching hurricane and wildfire season. And I know, being in Texas, you guys know what the heat is like. So how do these factors put everyone in prisons and jails at risk from your observation?
Well, let me first speak on the heat. I was in TDCJ during a Texas summer.
What's TDCJ?
Texas Department of Criminal Justice.
Thank you.
Yes. So I was in a unit during one of the Texas summers, which we get into the triple digits, and it's excruciating. So not only is it just uncomfortable, I mean, it's really uncomfortable, It's suffocating. But also, I don't know if you know that, like, whenever you're hot, you get aggravated or, just not easy to be around. Well, imagine that being around 58 people. Everybody's hot.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a way to get out. And so we start arguing with each other, fighting over the fan, fighting over water. So that puts a danger on everybody in the community, in the prison community, as well as the people who work there, because we are sitting there boiling, getting angry, and um, terrified. Really, a lot of it is we living off of fear, because when you're just laying there in your bed, dripping sweat, it's terrifying. I mean, and you really don't know if you're going to make it out. So I think um, that puts the entire prison at risk when people have to suffer in heat. Um, and the COVID puts everybody at risk. But I think that the problem with the people who are incarcerated is that we don't think about, they don't have a choice to social distance, you know, stay home if they don't feel well or whatever. They have to be there. And then if you're high risk, um, good luck getting to the doctor, and hopefully you're not, on your deathbed by the time you make it there. So, I mean, and whatever your thoughts of what punishment should be, prison should be punishment. There, like Rep Cortez said, at the end of the day, we are all humans.
Yeah.
And if we're going to give pigs and animals a proper living space, why can we not do that for the humans?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you shot off talking about the heat, and I just want to kind of point out to our audience. I saw a news flash this morning that there were 46 people found dead in the back of a 18-wheeler trailer from heat exposure, heat exhaustion in Texas down there. So it gets really hot in Texas, and it doesn't take long for people to perish. Thank you for pointing that out, Maggie. Mark, what about you? How do these factors, in your estimation, put people in risk at jails and prisons?
Sure. These factors are putting people at risk because we know that most areas in the United States still have no real plans to protect the health and well-being of people who are incarcerated. Like we said before, people who are incarcerated are normally neglected and exposed to cruel and unusual treatment it's been well documented during hurricanes, during COVID. I think of one story that we became aware of in Wisconsin early on during. There was a person in an overcrowded prison in Wisconsin, and he had asthma and diabetes. He was really worried about COVID. He had put in a petition to get an early release because of his health conditions. He was sentenced to time, not to death. He said that even in the petition. I was sentenced to 13 years in prison. I wasn't sentenced to death. And a judge in Milwaukee County denied his request to be released. And then Calvin died shortly thereafter. And there were so many other cases, so many other stories like that in Wisconsin and throughout the country. So really, dehumanization of people who are incarcerated is at the heart of this problem, particularly dehumanization of Black and brown people, of Indigenous people. That's been historic in this country, going on for so long. And so we really have to have policymakers who start to view incarcerated people as human beings, members of families, assets to communities. And that's going to be at the heart of this. Is really, we have to understand that people don't stop being human just because they're incarcerated. So definitely have to prioritize the health and human dignity of incarcerated people and realize this is a racial justice issue. Wisconsin, for example, detains Black men and Indigenous men at a higher rate than any other state. That's not acceptable. That's got to change. And so we know the communities that are being most disproportionately harmed by this, and it's really unacceptable. I'm happy to see Representative Cortez, others stepping up, but we really need to, get organized, get more directly impacted people involved, lift up the voices of more directly impacted people, and really have a lot of work to do on this. But conversations like this is a good first step where we have elected officials and directly impacted people in the same room having productive conversations that are moving things forward and will eventually lead to concrete policy changes at some point, which will improve the system for all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. Courageous conversations are definitely necessary. Representative Cortez, can you speak to the public health impact for everyone in our communities when we don't prioritize the health and human dignity of incarcerated people?
Well, the overall public health of the, for example, Dominguez State Prison, it does impact the community that's surrounds the prison. These incarcerated individuals will one day be released after serving their time. And it's important that their health be as strong as possible as they re-enter our communities. Most of them, a lot of them will re-enter the community that they're, in the closest proximity. And so whatever it is in terms of whatever the, health issues they may have been dealing with, combating there in the state prison, those health issues will then become the responsibility of the community once they're released. And so it's important that we provide the best access to healthcare for them while they're there at Dominguez. So when they are released and they do re-enter society, that their impact to the public health system overall is minimal, and that they're able to produce and also be effective members of the community right away in terms of joining the workforce or whatever it is that they can do to contribute to our local community.
Thank you for that. And as a follow-up question or point, I'm curious, have you given any thought to what's called churn? Churn is, when it comes to COVID-19, churn is the reproduction of the infection of COVID-19 that happens among people incarcerated, but it transmits to the staff that returns back to the community. So it carries this back out to the community, even though it may be controlled. So have you given any thought to, about maintaining the or keeping the churn rate reduced so people that's may be impacted inside don't transmit it to the people that carry it back outside?
And you bring up a great point in terms of the staff members that are there on a daily basis with the inmates, and they're exposed to a lot of the same health issues there inside the facility. And so you're correct, they don't stay the night there at the facility. They do go home to their family members. And when they do return home, they do also potentially bring with them some of the health issues going on at the facility. And so, yes, you are correct. We need to ensure that those staff members are also protected and provided with procedures in place to ensure that there is minimal transmission of any sort of health issue that might be going on inside the facility at that time. So that's a good point about the men and women that are part of the staff that do return home to their families each and every day.
Absolutely. We want to make sure they stay safe and our community stays safe as well. Thanks for that. This question for all three of you guys, I'm kind of curious. What do you guys think about, what do you want people to know about emergency management as it relates to the criminal legal system, and why this kind of legislation is important? Anybody jump right in.
Well, I think it's important that every facility, I'm talking specifically here in Texas, every facility have an emergency response plan, that they have it in place, which will give specific steps and procedures, guidelines for employee safety and inmate safety. That's why I introduced House Bill 2331 in the last legislative session to help ensure that each Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ, each facility has an emergency response plan in place to address issues such as a COVID pandemic and or Winter Storm Uri, which we experienced last year also. Those are the type of events that you can't foresee, obviously. But they do happen, and we need to have an emergency response plan in place. And I was able to address that with House Bill 2331. It made it out of the Texas House of Representatives. They passed it, and then it got to the state Senate. And unfortunately, it didn't. It ran out of time. And so I do plan on reintroducing this type of legislation to ensure that there is an emergency response plan in place for all TDCJ facilities, and also ensuring that there's an advisory board to be looking at these issues and studying these issues throughout the year, and ensuring that we're just not being reactive, but we're also introducing proactive best practices into the facilities before the pandemic happens, before winter storm happens.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you for introducing that bill. That's a powerful piece of legislation, and I'm proud that you actually did it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We hope to get it over the finish line at the next legislative session.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I hope our constituents in Texas are listening to you.
Thank you.
What about you, Maggie? Why is this kind of legislation important from your estimation?
Well, I think the legislation is important, first of all, because of one thing that Rep. Cortez said earlier, too, is that we all come home. You know, we don't all get life sentences. And so if we're maintaining a healthy living while we're incarcerated, then that gives us a higher chance of not coming back, because we have time to focus on something else instead of just how am I going to survive for today.
Absolutely.
Hopefully I don't die today. So this legislation, and I think that it's sad that we have to have legislation for humanity, but that's why I think it's important, because if we don't, people will continue to die.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we definitely need legislation. Mark, what about you? How does legislation impact? Why is this important for your constituents in Wisconsin? This legislation, why is it important to them?
Sure, and obviously, it's crucial because it's literally a matter of life and death. There's so many people that have been harmed due to the lack of emergency management plans in Wisconsin, and we know so many people have been harmed. We know and lifted up a few of the stories earlier, and there's so many families across the state that it's just caused so much trauma, so much harm to families and people all across the state. And one of the things I go back to is when early on with the Just Us campaign, I heard Deanna say that in New Orleans, they had plans to save the cats and dogs during Hurricane Katrina, but they had no plans to protect the well-being and lives of incarcerated people. And that's just unacceptable. And it really is, causes really a lot of anger, you know what I mean? So I think that definitely, and it just goes back to the humanity and stuff. We have to prioritize the health and human dignity of people who are incarcerated and have a lot of work to do, like I said before, but definitely just from our own experiences and from being through the system, being incarcerated, and through COVID, through extreme heat, through all these emergency management situations, we've seen what happens, that incarcerated people are neglected and many times just left to die, left to get sick. And so I think this changes everything. If we get this emergency management legislation pushed through, this is literally going to save lives, and it's going to prevent people across the country from being harmed and becoming sick.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Rep. Cortez, I'm curious. I mean, those of us who do mobilizing advocacy in the community, we understand that side of the equation of how to do that. But from a legislative perspective, how do you continue to mobilize and advocate for emergency management in jails and prisons from the legislative perspective?
It's important to educate my colleagues. It's important to get them out to the facilities for TDCJ so they could see it for themselves. So any opportunity that I have, to invite some of my legislative colleagues to come and tour Dominguez State Prison, for example, I offer that to them. Anytime that there's legislation that is pending before the House, the Texas House, it's important that we hear testimony directly from the staff members of those facilities, that we hear testimony from the family members of inmates in terms of their maybe some of the shortcomings of some of those facilities. And so it's really just a matter of education and having some sort of experience of maybe seeing or touring the facility themselves, because once they see it and they hear it from the loved ones of inmates, if they do believe in public service and believe in representing all residents, then they're going to take action and ensure that these inmates and their loved ones also have a voice at the Capitol. And it's not difficult to do in terms of giving people perspective that they might not be aware of, or they may not have experienced previously. It's just a matter of presenting it in front of them and giving them access to the information and the testimony as soon as possible, that does usually change most of their minds. And it helped me to get the entire Texas House of Representatives to pass out House Bill 2331 last session. So education and access to some of the experiences at the facilities is critical.
Okay. As a quick follow-up question, I'm just curious because it's been one of my lifelong endeavors to get legislators and lawmakers and people to go in and visit jails and prisons. So I'm just curious, you say you've invited your colleagues in to tour the prisons with you. I'm just curious, what level of success have you had with that?
When I asked last session, if anyone wanted to tour, at the time there was still a lot of COVID protocols in place, and so it wasn't going to be the best time for them to come. Yeah. And so we're trying to see, hopefully there was no additional spikes this calendar year, and we can begin asking other colleagues if they would like to come by and see Dominguez. So at the time, though, last year during our legislative session, COVID was spiking pretty hard, and we weren't able to get any tours done, period, of any really facility at last calendar year. But we're hoping to try again this session, this year before the next legislative session, to be sending out some invites, first and foremost to my local colleagues, and then expanding out from the area.
All right. Thanks for sharing that. And good luck. Good luck. I hope you have success with that.
Thank you.
Mark, how do we continue to mobilize and advocate from the community perspective around emergency management plans in jails and prisons?
Yes, we have some real concrete examples with Just Leadership USA. Just Leadership USA has been a part of leading numerous effective campaigns. For example, Close Rikers. Just Leadership USA was very involved in another campaign that was previously thought to be impossible to achieve. It was, again, considered a joke, but in less than a year, the mayor of New York had committed to closing down Rikers, and we've seen similar results: Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Milwaukee, other areas that we worked in. So we know we have a blueprint already. We know that some of the key areas are base building, definitely getting involved, investing in leadership of directly impacted people through the Emerging Leaders Program, Leading with Conviction, other programs throughout the country is a real crucial element in terms of building long-term sustainable change. So we have the boots on the ground, the base part of it. Correcting the narrative is a really key piece as well, just helping people to reimagine what's possible, putting out that vision. I think a lot of the campaigns that Just Leadership USA was involved with really pushed the envelope and made people reimagine what's even possible, that we previously thought that you couldn't close down a jail, you couldn't decarcerate a prison in Wisconsin, you couldn't stop some of these new jails from being built in other areas throughout the country. Closing down jails in Philadelphia, New York, all these different areas really has inspired people across the country and really motivated and got people more involved and helped us to really believe that we can do more, we can actually achieve some of these things. And he wins as well, actually creating the policy change, so engagement with elected officials and doing that piece of it, the lobbying, and really lifting up the voices of those who've been most impacted and having that engagement between those of us who've been impacted, families who've been impacted, and getting them in front of legislators, making sure they're hearing stories, making sure we're showing up at these legislative hearings, sharing our testimonies at all these different opportunities that we have at the public hearings. Integrated voter engagement work is one piece that we do in Wisconsin, where we're doing this year round. So we're out canvassing, knocking on doors in the most impacted neighborhoods, getting literature out about our issues, about our organizations, but also tying that issue work with upcoming elections so we can educate people about candidates and encourage people to vote. And so it can have a real impact. In Wisconsin, for example, we've been able to get some candidates in there who are more sympathetic to our cause, and we're really able to move some of our policy agenda forward. That's particularly level. We're also definitely prioritizing some of the local races like DAs. I mean, that's going to be crucial. But also getting involved at the state legislative level, Milwaukee County supervisors, the Common Council, the races for governor in Wisconsin is really crucial because the governor can use their executive authority to push a lot of this forward, even without state legislation. So I think those are some of the key areas, and direct action is really key. With Close MSDF, some of these other campaigns, we were really out there constantly getting people out in the streets, having marches, demonstrations, pickets in front of Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility, getting people signed up, building our membership list, talking to so many people coming in and out, walking around just in front of these prisons. And I think that's really some of the key components of all this. But yeah, just to be relentless as well, to constantly put. We've seen some of this one step forward. Our opposition is trying to push us 2 steps back. So I think to really be relentless, to make sure we're doing the media work, doing these type of engagements as well, but really that getting back to that, correcting the narrative part, getting those voices up with the video shoots, some of the things we've done with this campaign, lifting up the voices of people who've been impacted by incarceration during the pandemic. I think that's really key, where we're constantly getting the word out in media and in these type of formats where we're not taking steps back, but constantly putting pressure on and being relentless and pushing forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Katie, please forgive me for my oversight and not bringing you into the conversation. I apologize for that. And as someone who has such an important position as yours to make sure Representative Cortez is looking good and gets his information in time, would you mind first introducing yourself and take a few minutes to share with us your whole perspective on this whole process, what you've seen and your take on what you think should happen around emergency management plans?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm Katie Kelly. I work for Representative Philip Cortez. I serve as his scheduler and district director. And so it's been really interesting to see everything unfold, just from obviously personal perspective and COVID and how everybody had to adjust to it. But then also just kind of being on the receiving end of those phone calls and speaking with a lot of the families, working with TDCJ and trying to get answers for some of these individuals, and getting them to be able to call home to their loved ones. I know there was a lot of miscommunication and sometimes no communication at all. So it's been pretty interesting to just kind of watch it, but also very I guess exciting and rewarding to see that my boss has kind of taken interest in seeing that it hit so close to home. Dominguez is literally in our backyard, so to see him voicing his concerns for that community there at Dominguez, and just kind of being an advocate for them when they don't really have a voice has been really cool to see. And so hopefully, like my boss said, we can see that come to fruition next session, and hopefully we can help a lot of these individuals. They are incarcerated, but as everyone has said, and we all know, they are human beings and deserve to be treated fairly and with respect.
Absolutely. You talked about the communication challenges. I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about not only those challenges, but what other types of challenges have you seen in your addressing this work?
Overall, or
Yes.
just with this? I've been with Representative Cortez's office now since I think 2013. And so I've really learned a lot. My communication skills, I think, have become a little better because I've had to speak more to people. But I like it, and it's rewarding to be able to help people who come to us with different issues that they may be having with the state, or on any level. We can always point them in the right direction. So just being able to help and work in this office has been really rewarding for me.
Okay, thank you so much. So at this last portion of the show, I would like each of you to take a few minutes to share your final thoughts of what you're going to talk about around the emergency management situation, and any call to actions you may have for your particular work that you're doing or whatever is in your area. Maggie, would you like to go first, please?
Sure, thank you. Encouraging for
You breaking up, Maggie.
I'm sorry. Okay. Am I here?
Yep, you're here.
Okay, so this has been really encouraging for me, and I'm really inspired for next session. I think one of the most important things is relationships, like with people like me and Katie and Rep Cortez's office, because like Rep Cortez is not always available. So when we build these relationships, we can know what's going on inside and on the ground as we build grassroots support around this. And there is interest growing, and there are people who are ready to push this over the finish line for next session. So I'm pretty excited. And I would say a call to action is to follow this bill. It's not going to be 2331 next session, but whenever we get one, I'll definitely make sure that it is advertised and put out. And we'll be making phone calls and doing what we can to educate the community and our state reps.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Mark, what about you? What final thoughts do you have to share with the audience, and what would be your call to action if you have one?
Yes. I'll say all people deserve to be treated with dignity, fairness, and compassion, but the current system around with the lack of emergency management plans is it's just at odds with common sense approaches to justice, and it's at odds with our widely shared values of dignity, fairness, and compassion. And we definitely have the solution here. We see that with the Just Us legislation is really a concrete step forward to really change things and move things way forward in a really huge way in this country and in states throughout the United States. And I think that I would go back to a key point is really we need to prioritize investing in the leadership of directly impacted people. Just with the Leading with Conviction program, there's just so much human potential that's being wasted within the prison system right now. And we know that almost all people are going to be coming home at some point. And so when we invest in the health and human dignity of people who are incarcerated, that's an investment that's going to improve the lives of all people. When we're investing, making that investment in incarcerated people, when they get out, they're more likely to flourish and contribute to building safer, stronger, and healthier communities once they get out. And so it's a really crucial element is to make sure that we're protecting people with these emergency management plans, not just letting people languish and be exposed to cruel and unusual punishment during these emergency situations, because we've seen so many countless examples through people who've gone through the Leading with Conviction program. We're out here making such great contributions to actually building safer, stronger, and healthier communities. And when we have that investment in people who are impacted, we know that that strengthens us all. So, I mean, to really come back to that and to make sure that we're humanizing people who've been through the system and really viewing impacted people as human beings, assets to communities and members of families. And this is really my call to action, I would say, would be to definitely all folks in Wisconsin, definitely contact your United States representatives. And especially with elections coming up, there's a key opportunity to get candidates on the record, make sure that they're on the record supporting Just Us, supporting pushing forward emergency management plans within prisons and jails throughout the country. It's really a crucial element. So definitely to make sure we're contact engaging with candidates and for, people who are going to be in the United States Senate, United States House of Representatives, and then to start pushing this down at the state and local level as well, where we can also have a huge impact at the county level, the state level, where Department of Corrections, governors have so much executive authority. In some states we can get state legislation, other states we can get executive action, but there's definitely a path forward in every state, every area, where we can fundamentally change the system in this particular area so that we're really starting to respect the lives and human dignity of those who are incarcerated. Is really crucial.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Keep educating your constituents and make sure that they know that elections have consequences. Thank you. And Kelly, what final thoughts you'd like to share with us, and any call to action if you have any? What are your thoughts?
Final thoughts. Just looking forward to next session with my boss. If all goes well, and we can start working and just kind of be the support that he needs, and doing the work of talking with individuals and getting him the information, to see this bill come to fruition. So looking forward to that, but definitely the involvement. It takes a lot for individuals like Maggie, and Mark, who were directly impacted, to kind of rise up and discuss what they went through. I think that's important because they're in the trenches, so to speak, and we aren't. So we have to continue to hear from those individuals and try to do the work for them and be successful for that on that end.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that with us. And Rep Cortez, what about you? What are your thoughts?
I would just, thank you again for bringing us on this evening, and I want to thank everyone that's been involved. from all the different types of legislation that are introduced, not just the legislation I introduced last year, but also any other types of legislation that help bring dignity to those that are incarcerated throughout Texas. I think we need to continue to take a hard look at all of these potential pieces of legislation, stay involved, continue to come to the Capitol, provide that testimony that's critical to educating the House members and the Senate members as to the types of shortcomings that are happening at prison facilities throughout the state of Texas. Yes, the rule of law, rule of society causes for those who break the law to be punished, but that doesn't make them any less of a human being. And so we need to keep that in mind as we move forward and as we look at other types of legislation this coming session coming up in 2023, to where we can provide that human dignity to our inmates, whether it's ensuring that there's air conditioning, whether it's ensuring that there's an emergency response plan in place for pandemics or any other type of emergency. It's the least that we can do for any human being in our community, and that includes inmates.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, on behalf of Just Leadership USA, I'd like to thank each and one of our powerful and esteemed panelists for the work that you've done and put in. If you look behind me, you see I operate from the corner of hope and progress. You guys have given us a lot of hope, and I hope to see a lot of progress going forward. If you want more information around the Just Us campaign, go to justleadershipusa.org, JLUSA.org, and Just Us, and you'll find information on the campaign. You'll find how to become active in the campaign. You'll find letters that you can send to your elected officials to help push this legislation around emergency management plans. And with that, I bid you all adieu. Thank you for participating. Thank you for the audience, and everyone be well. Those closest to the problem are closest to the solution.